Thank you for joining me here at the Real Rescue Podcast, powered by Vertical Helicast. I'd like to say thank you to the sponsor of this episode, and that's Collins Aerospace. They're working side by side with their customers and partners to dream, design, and deliver solutions that redefine the future of our industry. Check them out today at collinsaerospace.com. And Axness. When lives are at stake and conditions are challenging, clear communication is of the utmost importance. Check them out today at axness.com. Now, coming up next in this part one episode, we're joined by a United States Coast Guard pilot. He's been in for just over 12 years from this recording, and he's got some stories to tell. So please welcome our next guest, Mr. Wryan Webb. My name is Jason Quinn. I am United States Coast Guard Rescue Swimmer number 500. These are my rescues and rescues from those of us that put our lives on the line every day so others may live. This is the Real Rescue Podcast.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Real Rescue. Man, I've got a guest today with us. He is a United States Coast Guard pilot, and he's coming to us with some amazing stories from out his career. And currently, you are a lieutenant commander?
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And yeah, you've been in for a long time then. So you're like, are you in charge of stuff back at the air station?
No.
Oh, okay. Not that. Just checking.
No,
All right.
No. Yeah,
I do it.
The assistant operations officer in Sitco right now. I also do the public affairs stuff. I do the COOP plan. I do a couple of other things, but mostly I'm a pilot, which is the way I like it.
Perfect. Right on. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Wryan Webb. Man, I'm so happy you came on. I really appreciate it. I love when pilots come on and tell their stories. And actually, I'm going to shout out to Dave Callan, because Dave Callan loves it when pilots come on too, because he's a pilot. And he's like, oh, I like the pilot stories. I'm like, I know, Dave. I know. I love you. I'm getting them.
Well, thanks for having me. And I'm looking forward to spending some time with you this morning and talking about the stuff that we love to talk about.
Heck yeah. Yeah, I'm all about it. I find it funny, actually, because you and I were just talking just before we hit record, and you're sitting in a hotel room right now, coming back from your P course, which is your pilot recurrent course down in Mobile. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. So I appreciate you booking this time in a hotel room with me. Is that weird? I'm not really sure.
No, if anything, we have a 2-year-old at home, so it's like you got to find the free time when you can find it. So got a little layover here, and no, it's perfect.
Oh, that's great. I love it. Well, Ryan, if you don't mind, give us a little background about who you are, kind of where you came from, what brought you into the U.S. Coast Guard, and being a pilot. What drove you to that?
Sure. Well, yeah. Thanks for having me. So I grew up in West Texas in the desert. I don't know if you've ever seen Friday Night Lights or Tin Cup or some of those movies where it's like just dirt and tumbleweeds, but that's definitely where I grew up.
Where exactly?
In Midland, Odessa. I actually grew up in Odessa. My parents are in Midland now, but it's basically the same place.
Okay. I know Midland. Real quick, I do know Midland. I've actually been through Lubbock, Texas. I know Lubbock.
Yeah.
That's is that around you? I don't know how.
Met. It's like 2 hours north of Midland, Odessa, but yeah, it's just the same kind of topography there.
Yeah.
In Lubbock.
Crazy! I can't believe I know that, but I do. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, Lubbock has an interesting smell to it.
Yes,
anyone that's ever been there, it smells like cows.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
And that's Buddy Holly. The Buddy Holly Museum is over there too. Is that right?
I think that in Lubbock, right?
Yeah.
I think it's in Lubbock. I think so.
Like totally random. I'm like, what? I didn't know this. I learned something new. Look at that. Buddy Holly, Lubbock, Texas.
Who would have thought?
I digress. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So that's nowhere near the ocean. Actually, it's nowhere near a lake. So I don't really know where the desire to be around water came from for me. Probably because I just never had it. But growing up, I was always passionate about aviation. In fact, I had all these little was it Mateo, I think was the company, but it's like these little models of airplanes that I would just fly around the house or the yard and stuff. And one of them, believe it or not, from when I was like 5 years old, was a Coast Guard 60. It's just one of
Yeah.
many, which at the time, like,
Awesome.
it just is what is what it is. But it is kind of funny to look back and be like, oh, I actually had one of these things like as a little kid. But I don't know, I just always wanted to be around aviation. And a little bit later in my childhood, uh, like high school years, got involved with Civil Air Patrol, which are you familiar with Civil Air Patrol?
A little bit.
Yeah,
If you go into a
it's
little
like
more with that.
it's the Air Force's auxiliary. So we think Coast Guard auxiliary is like, people that kind of help the Coast Guard with boarding, not boardings, but like safety inspections and stuff. The Air Force auxiliary is the Civil Air Patrol, and they actually help out with searching inland. So they have the largest fleet of Cessnas in the U.S. Um,
Wow.
and so most of these individual places have a Cessna like 172 type aircraft painted in Civil Air Patrol colors. It's paid for by the Civil Air Patrol slash Air Force somehow, and then they help fly and search for ELTs. Um, and as a cadet, you can kind of get into that world a little bit. They have a very strong cadet program that mirrors a JROTC, and you can get your pilot's license if you want. If you go to a special camp, or you can get a glider's license, or you can go and become part of a ground search and rescue team. And so there's a school in Texas, I think they call it GSARS, is like the Ground Search and Rescue Specialty School, where you go for a week. And we went there, and it was like a Delta Force retired dude and some other guy that were running this course. And so it very quickly became like more hardcore than I thought it was going to be. And but we learned so much, and I just absolutely ate it up. And kind of through that and talking with the people, the adults there that were leading that program, just realized hey, like I might have kind of a really strong interest, maybe even a passion for search and rescue. Um, so I don't know. I just kind of did some more research and decided to blend, the three of those things. It's like I always want to be by the water. Definitely have a definitely want to do something in aviation, and I think I want to do something with search and rescue. And it seemed like the Coast Guard was the best fit for that, and applied to the Coast Guard Academy. So somehow got into the Coast Guard Academy, did my time there. Got super lucky with a spot direct to flight school. Went to flight school with the Navy in 2012. Graduated in 2014. Went to Air Station Elizabeth City for my first tour. Ended up leaving there a little bit early to go to Traverse City to be part of the transition from 65s to 60s,
Oh,
and
cool.
did 4 years in Traverse City, and then came to Sitka about 2.5 years ago, and then here we are.
And here we are. And
Yeah.
and you've had like an incredible like career so far with even some of your rescues that you've been on. We're going to touch on some of these right now, but your very first rescue earned you a commendation medal. Um, awesome.
It's
So,
been an
uh,
incredibly fulfilling career, and that's the one thing I try and tell people is like, you know, if you get into Coast Guard aviation, no matter really where you go, you have just an incredible opportunity to help people, which is really what it boils down to. Like search and rescue. There's lots of different parts about that are interesting and exciting, but the best part of it's just helping someone. Like turning around in the seat and looking at the face of whoever just ended up in the back of the helicopter that's just immediately uh, in a much better place because they feel safe, they feel secure. Like that is the best part of the job. Um,
yeah,
Followed very closely by the camaraderie of working together with a team of four people to go do something crazy.
go do something
So
crazy. It's such a true statement.
yeah,
I love it. That's awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, Ryan. What I'm going to do, I'm going to read this commendation medal, and then I am excited to hear the whole backstory of this. So, your very first rescue. Citation to accompany the award of the Coast Guard Commendation Medal to Lieutenant Junior Grade Wryan C. Webb, United States Coast Guard. Lieutenant Junior Grade Webb is cited for outstanding achievement while serving as co-pilot aboard 6012 on the night of 14 February 2015, responding to an EPIRB from the 40-foot trimaran sailing vessel Trio and its 4 survivors 60 miles offshore from Wilmington, North Carolina. Lieutenant Junior Grade Webb piloted the helicopter 140 nautical miles through a developing winter cold front, producing low ceilings, 40-knot winds, and snow. Upon arrival overhead the sailing vessel Trio, he facilitated exceptional teamwork amongst Sector North Carolina, the crew of an on-scene Navy H-60, the USS George Bush, and the survivors aboard the sailing vessel Trio. He expertly called out the approaching 14 to 20-foot swells to help time the 6 successful hoists. Furthermore, Lieutenant Junior Grade Webb expertly controlled the electro-optical infrared camera to track the position of the swiftly drifting sailing vessel Trio, which quickly disappeared from the view after each survivor jumped into the frigid water. His efforts exponentially increased the crew's situational awareness and specifically enhanced the safety of the mission. With the survivors and crew aboard, Lieutenant Junior Grade Webb navigated 60-knot winds, low visibility, and blowing snow en route to Elizabeth City. His aeronautical skill and calm demeanor in the face of challenging nighttime circumstances ensured the safe return of the aircraft, crew, and survivors. Lieutenant Junior Grade Webb's dedication, judgment, and devotion to duty are most heartily commended in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard. Oh my God, Ryan. Case number 1. Are you kidding? That is awesome.
It was, well, yeah, it is weird to hear you read the award. I think that's been kind of in a desk for the last several years, and we don't do it for the award, but it is interesting to think back on some of these. Yeah, that was a crazy first case, and obviously, being a newly minted co-pilot sitting in the left seat, there's parts of me that feel like I probably don't deserve that award. I was just kind of helping out as best I could from the left seat and way outside my element. But
way to be humble. I like that. I appreciate that.
It was truly incredible watching. The pilot in command, Eric Oliphant, was definitely a big mentor of mine in those first few years, and the rescue swimmer Mike Hernan, who continues to do great things. He's back in the Coast Guard these days. He got out for a little bit and came back in. Our flight Matt Duran. Just watching the teamwork between the three of them, who definitely had all the tools that they needed to do that case, and having a small part to be part of that was humbling. Yeah, so I can provide a little more detail there if you're interested.
Heck yeah, absolutely. Now, let's touch on this for a second. Hold on. Because you had 40-knot winds, low ceilings, and a snowstorm coming in. So then you're flying 60-knot winds back in a snowstorm back to North Carolina, like back to East City. So that means the snowstorm hit you while you were in the middle of that rescue. And you're talking to another H-60 that's off a USS carrier that's out in the middle of the ocean, plus sector. Yeah, you have your hands full. That I know for sure.
Yeah, it was. I was trying to figure it out later because it didn't in the moment. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Like, how do we have a headwind, or mostly a headwind, on the way down there, and then on the way back we ended up with an even bigger headwind? Like, how does this work? And then we started kind of digging through the charts, and it was like, oh, like I'm guessing, well, I'm not guessing, but essentially a cold front was moving through. And we had basically the boundary winds we were flying through on the way out there, and then it kind of passed, and we're flying through the back end of it on the way back. So, yeah, it was nighttime. It was Valentine's Day. It was not great weather. It was kind of the worst weather I'd been on duty with at that point, which was really just a couple months. And so we got launched for this boat, and what we were told was it was a tri-hold racing sailboat. Because come to find out, it was the fastest production sailboat that was being made at the time. And they were basically, they'd picked it up somewhere on the East Coast and they were sailing it down to Florida for the owner. But something was wrong with it, and they needed our help. So we ended up taking off. We're heading out that way. We got word that USS George Bush, I believe it was, had launched a 60, and they were going to beat us there by about half an hour. But
and we're like,
they wanted
no,
us to continue.
no.
Yeah,
Don't let the Navy beat us. Don't let the Navy beat us. Oh, Navy boys are like, go Navy.
Yeah. But they're like, please, like, keep going. We want you to go there and just provide cover, if nothing else. It's like, all right, well, sounds good. And it was dark, it was bumpy, it was windy. But the nice thing about those areas, like, you get offshore and it's a little bit less turbulent, unless it's like a hurricane. You have a little bit more streamlined winds. You're not dealing with mountains, at least. So we're heading out there. It was, I can't remember how far it was offshore. It was about 140 or 160 miles for us to fly, because we had to fly south to get to it. And as we're getting closer, we start to hear the Navy 60 talking to the sailboat, the sailing vessel trio. And we weren't close enough to hear the boat talking back, but we could hear the helicopter crew. And, in our line of work, we have become probably very attuned to the, like, inflection and tone of voice and what's kind of behind that. Certainly within our own crew, you can tell a lot about the stress level of the people running the hoist, for example, without looking at them, because you can't look at them in our helicopter, just by the way they're talking. The same could be said about that 60 from the Navy that night, because you could just hear it in their voice as they're transmitting this boat that they were stressed out. And, rule number one that they teach you in flight school is to sound cool on the radio. Nobody was sounding cool that night. So, we're getting closer, and it's like, okay, can you swim? And we're like, what is going on out there? And so we're just kind of listening in. We're not providing input. And it's like, not a dig on the Navy at all, right? They don't practice this stuff. The Coast Guard, this is most of what we practice. Like, you ask us to go hunt a sub, and I wouldn't even know where to begin. But
Right?
this kind of stuff, like, they don't, this is just not something that's in their wheelhouse, and that's fine. I think they'd come up with a plan they were going to deploy their crew raft, like their emergency raft, and then have the people on the boat try and get in that, and then they were going to try and hoist from the raft. Which, in our world, there's kind of some warnings in our flight manual about that exact thing, because you can blow that raft over and you can cause a lot of issues, right? So, the pilot that was Eric Oliphant, the pilot in command that night, was like, hey, Navy helicopter, this is a Coast Guard helicopter. We're, 20 minutes out at this point, maybe even closer, maybe like 10 or 15. Why don't you guys just hold off for a couple minutes? Maybe we can get up there. We can take a look at it too, and maybe between the two of us, we can come up with a better plan, or a different plan at least. Not like overtly, hey, we're going to take this, like, you guys leave. Just like, hey, let's work together on this. Like, I have problems with this plan. It was basically what he was saying. Like, I have concerns. Let's come to a solution together. And they're like, yeah, sounds good. So we get up there and we end up making an approach next to the boat. And our first plan was, we were going to have the captain of the sailboat send out a life ring with some rope on it out the back, and we're going to deploy Mike to the water, and then he was going to use that to kind of grab a hold and get up on the boat. All their sails were down, their engine was not working, but they were drifting, and so we didn't realize at the time how much they were drifting, but that was going to come into play real soon. So we send Mike down. He goes to the rope, and it immediately is just ripped out of his hands, and no chance he's going to catch up to the boat. So Matt ran in the back, immediately called for the recovery of the swimmer. We went in, we picked him up, and then I've been following around, following along with the EOIR, our infrared camera up front. And typically when we do hoisting in the Coast Guard, you kind of move in, forward, and right. You move back and left to get away from things. Back in, forward, and right, and back and left. And I had noticed that in just that time, since we had deployed him and gone and picked up Mike, the sailboat had moved back and left behind us. And I was worried that if we had come back and left, we would have basically just slid right into the mast of the boat. So I was like, hold, like, no, don't come back and left. So then we did a departure from the water, another orbit, came back and made another approach down and tried to make another plan. And it was at this point we realized that between the swell and all the wind that was on scene and just the fact that this boat is an incredibly sleek racing sailboat, it was moving at somewhere between 18 to 20 knots through the water.
Oh, wow.
So we were
That's
actually
ripping. Like
yeah,
a dead water boat, 18 knots, 20 knots?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's ripping. Dang.
It was ripping. And we hadn't realized that on the first go around because everything was just, haywire. But once we kind of got in the hover next to the boat and we're backing down next to it, we're looking at our hover bars, which are, coming from the EGIs and telling us general drift, direction and speed. And I was like, holy crap. And like, we're doing almost 20 knots backing down just to stay next to this boat. Like, no wonder you couldn't hold on to the rope, that's impossible. So we talked about it for a while, and eventually we also resorted to having him jump in the water. But the way that we did it was we had Mike go down and he'd be holding there above the water. And then I'd call the boat. I'd say, hey, next person jump in the water. So they jump in the water and we just drop Mike right next to him and then get all situated and pull him back up. The challenging part there too being, I think it was, we estimated close to 15-foot swell. So that, just not easy conditions, even once you got both people together in the water, and Mike was having to deal with that. But we did that for each person. We would have Mike go down on the hook, they jump in the water, drop Mike right next to him, let them get all situated, pick them back up in the helicopter. The boat would be, see ya, way behind us. So then we'd take off, find it again, shoot another approach, do the same thing, take off, make another approach. We did that for all 4 people. Wow. 3 were over the age of 50. One was a 14-year-old boy. At one point, I was trying to do my best to call the swells, but I think it was either the second or third hoist with someone on there. Mike just got totally obliterated. It was like calling a wave, and then he just got smoked. Felt real bad about that, but we ended up getting everyone off the boat, and then we went back to the air station. The Navy was great. They were circling us the whole time. They kept asking us if we needed fuel, presumably because they don't have close to 6 hours of fuel on board. They have like 2.
Yeah.
We're like, no, we're good. No, we're good. Please stop talking to us. No, we're good. They eventually left.
Please stop talking to us.
It was too much. It was like the George Bush was calling us. They were calling us.
Hilarious.
The boat was talking to us. Sector was talking to us. I was over there just melting in the left seat. I was getting seasick trying to watch the EOIR. Anyway, so we got everyone on board. We start heading back, and then it's just like worse and worse weather. It seems like most of the precipitation, thankfully, had kind of passed through, but it was just gusty and windy. And there's a spot we go through called I think it's the Alligator Transition there in Elizabeth City, and you have to do it at like 200 feet if you can't verify that the bombing area that you're flying under is clear. So then we're flying through this at night at 200 feet, just getting tossed. It felt like someone took a giant hammer to the bottom of the helicopter at one point, and I was just like, what is going on? Finally landing back in Elizabeth City, I was flying kind of the way back, and it was wild to me to keep the aircraft balanced and in trim. By the time we were landing, the little wind bug, we have a bug on the PFD that says what the winds are, It was
Yeah.
saying 73 knots. And
Holy cow.
I didn't even think that was possible, in North Carolina. But anyway, so we're landing back into Elizabeth City, and I'm flying a balanced flight approach to the runway. So, you're not keeping the nose in trim, you're keeping the aircraft in trim. And I'm watching the runway through my door window. So basically just kind of flying sideways down the runway into the wind, land, and we offload these people. And it was awesome. It was the coolest case of, this is the coolest thing I could ever have imagined. It was the first time, but also there was a moment there, like after things started to calm down, where I was like, I just like really wide-eyed, psychologically, like, what did I get myself into? Like, this is crazy.
Awesome.
But so cool, and you have to shake the hands of everyone there and that got off the boat. One of them was a prior coastie, who had, a surface person, cutter person that had done their time in the Coast Guard and gotten out. And so they were all super cool about it and super appreciative. So yeah, it was awesome.
Wow. Man, that is awesome, Ryan. Well done. Well done to you and your crew. That's amazing.
I still keep in touch with Mike a little bit every now and again, and it's like every time, like, hey, you remember that one time in North Carolina? Like, how could I forget it? That was crazy. You should, if you haven't, you should reach out to Mike, because I know that was a case that that definitely left an indelible mark in his mind as well. Mike Herman.
I would, Mike. Let's go, Mike. Let's go. I have put the offer out to every swimmer out there. This is an open platform for them to come on and share their stories. So
yeah,
Mike, let's go. Come on.
Get it up.
Oh man, yeah, well done to you and your entire crew. That is amazing. So it's kind of side note, and as I'm thinking about this, your first rescue going out there. Now, mind you, and I know as pilots, you guys go down to Pensacola and you fly down there to get your like pilot license, right? You get your wings there, right?
Get your wings. Yep.
Yeah, and then from there you go to Mobile, Alabama, where you do the Coast Guard transition. I don't know what it's called. It's
a transition course. So you come out of flight school knowing how to fly, in its basic sense. You know how to fly instruments. You know how to fly in a traffic pattern. But then you go to Mobile, and that's your first exposure to the Coast Guard 60, to any 60 really. You have to learn all the systems in the 60, all the avionics, and you get just a small taste of hoisting. You get one hoisting flight in the right seat, and then you go out for a nighttime hoisting flight, and you sit in the left seat just to kind of see what it's like. And then really, the way the Coast Guard is structured is the majority of learning how to be a SAR pilot is OJT. It's those first 2 years at an air station that take you from like someone who doesn't know anything but how to fly in its basic sense to a mission commander who's charged with, signing for an aircraft to take a crew out to go do a mission. Now, a 2-year aircraft commander is sometimes still like the most junior person on the crew, which was definitely my case for a long time. And I think the biggest lesson there to learn is like, rely on your crew. Like you have this many ideas together. Everyone has, 4 times the amount of ideas, and that's often the best way to tackle a problem is to get everyone involved. So yeah,
I love it.
That's the way that works. You get your wings, but it's like basically you can fly, kind of. Okay. And then you go to the transition course, and it's like, well, now you can kind of fly the 60, and then it's up to the unit to take you from there to being a SAR pilot.
That's awesome. Now, the reason I bring this up is because now you're in Elizabeth City and you've done all your qualifications. You got to that point where now you're in the crew, you're in the cockpit, and you're flying out, and you get called on something like that. Eventually, I like when you get on scene and you see everything that's going on. Is there a moment in time where you're like, "Holy shit!" and just like, "What the?"
Yeah, there was that whole flight was an instructional flight for me. It was Eric telling me, "Hey, do this. Hey, do this. Hey, do this," which was awesome because otherwise I would have just been completely clueless. And that's the way it's structured, which is wild when you think about it. But He was telling me stuff to do, and that's where like the personal, um, the self-discipline to learn these things, the foundational elements of what it means to be a pilot is so important, because he'd be like, call sector, tell him this. And if I didn't know, like if he had to then walk me through like which radio and how to tune and all those nuances of like foundational knowledge, then we would have been screwed. But he would just be like, at this point, here's what we need to do, and that's what you need to, like keep an eye on the boat. Okay. What does that mean? Well, that means I need to use this controller on this screen to keep an eye on that boat. And I need to see where that arrow is pointing to know where it's at, to know like, oh crap, like that thing's right behind us now. No one else can see it except me. And they're relying on me to know where that boat is. It's it was an instructional event, but you also have to come to it prepared with the basic knowledge that they can utilize to make sure that you're part of the crew.
Oh, Ryan, that's sick, dude. I love it. I love it. I love it, man. I love it. We're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
Collins Aerospace Goodrich. Whether your mission is saving lives or servicing high-value assets, Collins Aerospace's Goodrich hoists stay ready to assist. Features such as single-point payout reduce the potential for hoist-induced load swings, enhancing overall safety.
I'm going to bring us to a little bit further than in your Elizabeth City time, because while you were there, and actually I'm going to kind of fall back to the end, you earned yourself an achievement medal. Is that right? Yes, it is. Okay, an achievement medal in 2017 for your time in North Carolina. And I'm going to read this because I'm excited, because we're going to backtrack a little bit, because you have some missions in here that it actually talks about, and I'd love to hear about some of them. So let me read this here. Citation to accompany the award of the Coast Guard Achievement Medal to Lieutenant Wryan C. Webb, United States Coast Guard. Lieutenant Webb is cited for superior performance while assigned to Coast Guard Air Station Elizabeth City, North Carolina from October 2014 to April 2017. Serving with distinction as Aircraft Commander, Facilities Officer, and Assistant Airfield Operations Officer, Lieutenant Webb led the Airfield Operation Division for 4 months and adaptedly brokered partnership between the Coast Guard, Federal Aviation Administration, and Northrop Grumman, providing support to safety of flight equipment and enabled over 5,000 aircraft operations. As an MH-60T pilot, he upgraded to Aircraft Commander in an unprecedented 2 years, amassing over 600 flight hours in support of Coast Guard missions. His exceptional abilities and professionalism were evident in the completion of 43 search and rescue cases, resulting in 20 lives saved and or assisted. As a pilot in command of a dual first pilot flight, Lieutenant Webb displayed superior aviation skills, responding to a mid-air collision of 2 Navy F-18 aircraft. He quickly coordinated for expedited hot refueling and maneuvered the aircraft for recovery of 2 downed aviators. Demonstrating exceptional communications acumen, he managed 5 separate radio and coordinating with 4 ground units and multiple aircraft to deliver the survivors to medical care. His swift actions and deft aviation skill garnered national media attention and resulted in 2 lives saved. Lieutenant Webb's diligence, perseverance, and devotion to duty are most heartily committed in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard. Wow. All right, so that's from October 2014 to April 2017. And then you said you went up to, you kind of shortened there, 14, 15, 17, just a little bit, right? But seriously, 600 hours, 20 lives saved or assisted, 43 search and rescue cases. Oh my gosh. And the F-18. And I know the F-18 story because Claude Morrissey was on one of the helicopters that went out and did that. So
The one and only Claude.
Yeah, one and only Claude. Yeah. Thank God there's only one and only Claude. Love that guy. Love him. But 43 search and rescue missions. Holy smoke, that's a lot. Wow.
I mean, and that's just kind of your, honestly, that's kind of your standard end of tour type award there in Elizabeth City. Elizabeth City gets a bad rap sometimes just because the town is not, it's not as at the time it wasn't as attractive as some other places. It's come a long way, is my understanding, since then. But the great thing about Elizabeth City is you really do have some pretty good SAR there. It's a great place to learn as a junior person. Every one of us leaving there in my time frame had write-ups like that. In flying 600 hours in 2.5, 3 years was certainly not unheard of. So it was a great first place to learn and to fly, and I learned so much there from people that have just paid dividends over the years since then. Just incredibly grateful to have that opportunity.
Beautiful. So run us through, let's see. You have 43 cases, 20 lives saved or assisted, and an F-18 that crashed into each other. Pick a story, man. I'm in, dude.
The F-18 one was that was definitely a fun one. So backstory, in the Coast Guard, I'm sure you have a lot of listeners that aren't Coast Guard, but we have 3 levels of normal pilot progression. You start off as a co-pilot, and ultimately the Coast Guard's trying to make everyone an aircraft commander. And in between that, you have this intermediate stage of being a first pilot, where you have a pretty thorough systems knowledge. You have, at this point, you have your advanced SAR qualification, which means you've gone through both hoisting syllabi that you do at the local unit. And in some cases, you can actually go out as the PIC, the pilot in command, even though you're not an aircraft commander. There's oftentimes a lot of restrictions on that. You can't take passengers, for example. You can't fly a flight plan that would require you to have an alternate from your destination point. There's a bunch of stuff like that. And it's really command dependent, like whether or not the command has a couple first pilots that they're willing to send out on their own without either of them being an aircraft commander. So it's a little unique to go do first pilot flying, but we had a command at the time that was supportive of that, and we had a whole slew of us that were first pilots. And so if you can let 2 first pilots go, it's actually really phenomenal experience, because it's the first time that you get to be in charge of an aircraft, and you're not even an aircraft commander yet, but you end up learning so much once you start actually being in charge of that. You just everything sounds different, everything feels different. Like, do you guys hear that? Do you guys feel that? It's nerve-wracking, but it's great to start getting an edge on that learning curve of the quote-unquote being in charge, which is really just being responsible for everyone before you start doing it as an aircraft commander. So that's the backstory. And I was flying with Jack Shadwick, who was another FP, first pilot. He's senior to me, so he had signed for it, but it very much felt like, oh boy, you know what you're doing? No. You know what you're doing? No. Cool, let's go do it. And and so what they did was they sent the duty crew and our crew down to, I think it was Wilmington. It's fairly far south in our AOR, to go do a hoist training flight for both of us. It was like a morning sortie. And so we both fly down there. I think the duty crew gets there a little bit before we do. They jump on the 47 to do boat training, and we pick up a hover close by to do swimmer work. And so we're there not very long, maybe like 10 minutes or so. I don't even think we had started doing a hoist yet. And sector starts blowing up. And they're like screaming at the ready crew, like, we need you to divert to Ocracoke, actually offshore at Ocracoke. And so they wrap up everything and they start going. We're like, oh, cool. Well, maybe we'll hit the boat first instead. And that way our rescue swimmer can stay dry till the end. And then we'll do the rescue swimmer work later. Like, that's where we're thinking. Because they never divert more than one helicopter. You only have one rescue duty crew, And so we're starting to kind of shift around. And then they call our tail number and like, hey, we need you to divert to Ocracoke, offshore Ocracoke for starter. We're like, yeah, you get the wrong tail number. That's the other one. They're like, no, we need you to go too. It's like, what? Both? 2 times helicopters? And they're like, yeah, we need all hands on deck. It's like, oh, wow, what? Okay, wow. And it just so happened that we were on a hoisting flight as two first pilots flying, and, God help them, a rescue swimmer and a flight mate that were willing to fly with us. So we start wrapping things up and we start heading that way. Now, to get to where we needed to go from where we were, there was all sorts of military airspace because you have to fly basically through all the Cherry Point stuff, which is just a whole conglomeration of areas that are sectioned out as various training areas, and you have to get clearance through those because the last thing you want to do is fly right through a dogfight thing.
Yeah.
So the duty crew was off ahead of us. They got a 10, 15-minute head start, and then we're kind of falling behind them. We're talking to them back and forth, and neither of us can get in touch with Cherry Point. Like, two F-18s, we come to find out, had collided, and all four people ejected because they were training F-18. So it was one that had like a student up front and an instructor in the back. So these details start coming out, and we're all thinking about it. It's like, okay, now it makes sense. You got four people, probably all four of which need to be on a backboard or a litter or something like that, because ejections, you're thinking about spinal type stuff or worse. And so like, all right, that makes sense. But we're having a hard time getting clearance through the airspace because all those controllers are just focused on the East Coast, offshore areas. And as I start running through the fuel calculations with the point, I'm like, hey, Jack, like, I don't think we're going to have fuel to do this. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, if we're going to go out there, let's say we even spend like a really quick 15, 20 minutes hoisting, and then we're going to need to take them to a hospital, which is likely going to be either the Navy hospital in Norfolk or Norfolk Centero, which is level 1 trauma. We're not going to have the gas to do it. He's like, oh, man. So my recommendation to the crew is that we go into Cherry Point and we hot gas there because we know they have hot gas pits. Neither of us had ever been there to it, but we always knew it was an option. And he's like, oh, man, really? Like, probably going to totally miss out on the action. I'm like, are you sure about that? I was like, I'm pretty sure, man. You're totally welcome to run the couch yourself. I take flying if you want to look over it, make sure I didn't mess it up. He's like, no, I trust you. Let's do that. So we go through that whole thing. I let the other crew, the duty crew, know that we're going to divert for fuel. And they're like, yeah, it's going to be tight for us too, but maybe we'll do the hoist. We'll land on the beach. We can transfer them to you guys, and you guys take them the rest of the way once you show up, or something like that. I'm like, okay, yeah, sounds good. Focus on getting clearance in. And so it took us a long time to get up with the controllers and get cleared in all that stuff, but we went in, we got our hot gas figured out, bumped up the fuel load, and as we're taxiing out, we see the duty crew flying in to hot pits as well. We're like, hey, like, I thought you guys were going. Like, yeah, we took a closer look at fuel. We also need a hot gas. This is just it's not smart. I was like, all right, so cool. We'll see you later. And they're like, hey, like if you guys, if you're not filling up to it, like this won't take us very long. We're only gonna be a couple minutes behind you. Like, don't feel like you have to hoist. I was like, you ain't stealing this. Are you kidding me? So we keep going, and they just keep trying to call us. Like, no way, you're not taking this. Come to find out, when this had happened, they also launched a C-130 from Elizabeth City, and they launched a third crew from Elizabeth City. So the crew from Elizabeth City they made a pipe like who can fly, and they found two pilots. They found a couple of rescue swimmers, which just happened to be Claude was one of them, and Derek Ainsley was the other. I'm sure you know both those guys. Super solid.
Yeah.
And so the C-130 found the people in the water. They'd used the sea dye marker, which, by the way, that stuff works like crazy. They'd come in, like, and I love the hurt guys. They'd come in, they like dropped a flare and stuff, or like a smoke deal. So the 60 came in right behind them, knew right where the winds were, came in, and they hoisted two of the dudes out of the water. I can't remember exactly how they did it. I think they had put one guy in a backboard, in a litter. Is that a thing? I can't remember. Anyway, they got him up there, and they used the backboard to get him onto the troop seats, sent the litter back down, got the other guy out. And then they left Derek Ainsley behind. and they pieced out for the hospital. So
Like
then
in
we're
the
showing
water?
up next. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. So then we show up. Oh, it's probably half an hour later, and by the time we showed up, a Good Sam had picked up the other two, and the rescue swimmer, and then they were transferred onto a 47, all offshore. So when we showed up, there were two guys on a 47 with Derek, and he had had enough time to kind of go through with them and make sure that he wasn't really worried about any kind of spinal injuries. So we hoisted those guys up in a basket, and then we took them to the hospital and landed. And it's crazy. And, word travels fast. We're setting up the approach into the hospital pad, and it's just a ring, like 3/4 of this pad is surrounded by building, and then the rest of the pad was surrounded by news crews because the word had gotten out that two F-18s had collided, and like everyone was out there. Like, oh boy, like don't mess up this approach. Everyone's watching, and we dropped those guys off, and we came back and landed at the air station, and yeah, it was the duty crew was a little sore because they were on duty and the only ones that didn't get to be part of this like crazy thing, and it was stolen by the super junior crew, but it was really cool. We landed, like the CO, the XO, ops all came out and met us there at the aircraft as we're shutting down, like doors open, they're like high-fiving and stuff. It was a really cool case to be part of. Like, not bad weather, not challenging or anything. It's just the fact that it was, the two of us pilots neither of us were aircraft commanders. We're both super junior. We're working with a crew that has collectively way more experience than we do, and the four of us just work together to go out there and get this thing done. It was awesome.
Dang, man, that's pretty badass, man. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
I was talking to my P course partner actually this week. Was like, were you there at the time when the two F-18s collided and those two FPs went and did that case? I was like, yeah, I was. Yeah, I was there at that time. And he's like, was that you? I was like, yeah. I was a left seater. I was running fuel calcs and stuff. He's like, what? He's like, do you realize that story is on every first pilot board like of all time now? I was like, I hadn't really realized that, but I guess that makes sense, like because you typically go through a board somewhere in there, like first pilot, advanced SAR, where they're kind of asking you some questions about judgment stuff before they let you sign for an aircraft as a first pilot. And it would make sense, like, hey, it is a possibility that you end up on something like this where you get diverted. You have to go do a rescue.
Yeah.
Talk us through it. And again, that just kind of goes back to like the training and the process there of, that on that 2-year on the job training, there are some opportunities within there ahead of time before you make it to the aircraft commander level where you're kind of relied upon to do some stuff. And thankfully we have really strong mentors in the organization that trains the next group, so it's pretty cool.
Man, that's freaking awesome. I love it. Oh my gosh. We're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
Axnis. The Axnis PNG wireless ICS system delivers cutting-edge wireless ICS technology to any aircraft as a fully integrated system or as a carry-on, carry-off mobile base station. The PNG wireless system is the right solution for any mission.
If anyone's talking bad about Elizabeth City, just like, hey, there's some really crazy stuff that happens there, like one-way SAR to Bermuda, which is 600 miles, flying a helicopter across 600 miles to an island in the Atlantic, F-18, like there's a huge military nexus there. We did medevacs off the USS Cole twice, did medevac off a sub, and then, like all the sailing stuff that goes on there. Between sail races to Bermuda every year, just sailboats going up and down. We do a lot of cruise ship medevacs out there. So if anyone's coming up through the pipeline, maybe in flight school, or maybe they just got orders to Elizabeth City and they're not super pumped about it, like, you got some good times ahead of you. It's a place that definitely needs and uses that skill set and those crews. So it's a good spot.
Sweet. So you just brought up I got 3 questions. One, did you ever fly to Bermuda? I have to go out there.
Yeah. Yep.
It's like, all right. So now I was an airman in East City, so I was not part of the shop. Part of the shop, but I was not standing duty as a swimmer at the time, right? Now,
Okay.
some of my
Yeah.
buddies had done that, but now to Bermuda, it's like you fly out of East City, you go to the rescue, you just keep going, and just keep going to Bermuda. Is that accurate?
That's one way that it can happen. Well, what we did was there was actually a boat. I think it was like 200 miles past Bermuda that needed a rescue. So our crew was the off-going duty crew, and our job was to ferry the aircraft there. And then they deadheaded a second crew in a Herc to pick it up, and then they went out and did the rescue 200 additional miles, brought them back. And so that's how we ended up with that. We were just flying out there. We didn't actually do the SAR for that one.
I've been part of that too. Alaska.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah.
And then all that crew comes back. They're like, that was amazing. Oh, and you're like, yeah, thanks. I'll just take your broken ass aircraft back to Elizabeth City now. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's all right. It's gone the other way for me too.
The way
So
it
it's
works
cool.
is like the ferry crew typically gets to spend the night in Bermuda and stuff. In our case, I don't want to. The guy on the deadhead crew that was in charge was also in charge of a lot of other things at the air station, and he wanted to spend the night in Bermuda. So as a ferry crew, then we jumped on the Herc, and we sat in the Herc for the next several hours while they flew cover 200 miles offshore to do the case, and then flew cover back to Bermuda, and then flew all the way back to Elizabeth City. So I didn't sleep at all, obviously, because you're in chairs that are doing this the whole time. It's like rocking forward, rocking back, rocking forward, rocking back. Sitting there in my dry suit after having flown 600 miles offshore, just completely livid. Got back to Elizabeth City. It was daytime now, and I drove home. Like, my Bermuda story was exceptionally less cool than anyone else's because it was like not at all enjoyable. But
gosh.
yeah, it's pretty crazy to think about that. We ended up. We didn't have, these days you pretty much have to have a pretty strong tailwind to make it all the way there without refueling, just with the upgrades that we've done to the aircraft. The CAS weighs more than it used to when it was a J model. Our tanks oftentimes are the new Robinson tanks, which carry less but weigh more. So you rarely have the conditions to just go straight there without refueling. And in our case, we didn't have a headwind, we just didn't have enough of a tailwind to make it. So we flew about 100 miles, refueled on an aircraft carrier, and then flew the rest of the way, and then jumped in the Herc and rode that for the next however long it was, 6 hours, 10 hours. I lost track. It was all night. Yeah.
Wow, man, that's crazy. I love it. All right, so there was that one. Then my next one, submarine. Like, I've heard stories of this. I've never done a rescue off a submarine. I know a lot of guys have, but it's the way I understand it is you get a position. Here's your coordinates. You go here and you wait for it to pop, and then you've got like 5 minutes. Go, 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 and then it's boom, bloop, right back under. So what was that?
Yeah, it was something pretty similar to that. We knew we were medevacing a guy that was a crew member on a submarine, but we weren't going to be given a rendezvous position. They couldn't tell us where the sub was, nothing like that. Instead, they said, we want you to rendezvous with, I think it was the Cole, because we had already done a Cole at that point, so we knew kind of what to look for it. Like, we're going to give you a position, we're going to give you an intercept to USS, whatever, it was a destroyer. I was like, okay, but we're going for, it's a sub guy, right? He's like, yeah, we're not going to tell you where the sub is. Okay. But we're going to go to the destroyer. They're like, yep, don't worry about it. I'm like, okay, well, I kind of feel like I should worry about it. But anyway, so we're going to go. So we fly out there, and yeah, they didn't want to tell us where the sub was, which I guess is reasonable. But the sub was right next to the destroyer, and they ended up, they wanted to do a small boat transfer and then have us land on the destroyer, but it took so long. We just orbited that whole situation for so long that we had to refuel on the destroyer before we came back. But yeah, we didn't actually hoist the sub. I kind of wish we would have. That would have been fun. But we flew
Probably
circles
would've
around
made
it for a
like
long time.
so much faster. So much
Oh yeah,
faster if you just got
we had
guys,
we had
just come on the
no
radio. Hey
desire
guys,
or
we can do this a lot faster if you just stay right there. We'll be right. We'll come to you.
yeah, we like tried to present that option to them. Like once we were there, like in a hover, we're flying this way, and the Herc's flying the opposite way, about 500 feet above us. We're all just waiting, just watching. Like, hey, like we could knock this out probably real quick. And they're like, "What sub? I don't see a sub." I'm like, "Okay, like we're here, guys. We see it." uh, so we did that for so long. We had no intention of refueling, but we had to take on some extra gas. So yeah.
Right on. That's all good. Yeah, land on the destroyer and then just kind of hot fuel there.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Very cool. All right, and then you mentioned a couple more sailboats. So I'll take if you got one more sailboat story, because I love sailboat stories. And the reason I like sailboat stories is because they're so unique. And a lot of times what's hard for most people that aren't in our world is you have a 40-foot mast or ish, whatever, 40, 60, 30, pick a number, right? Some of them are like 80 feet tall. They're ridiculous. So you have to understand that in order for us to move over the top of that, we have to be above that. So now we're at like 80, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 feet above a pitching and rolling vessel. So I always get excited about hearing how guys get into sailboats and what they do.
Yeah. So we ended up, I only have one other sailboat case there, and we ended up not hoisting. It was the regatta, the annual regatta where everyone goes out to Bermuda. Someone had made a distress call, and it was really crappy weather, like bad enough weather that we're out there. We see a whole bunch of different targets on radar, but we can't see anyone type of weather. So we're just kind of picking our way through, and we're making call outs to figure out who was in trouble. We couldn't find them. And then one sailboat, actually, and it's nighttime at this point, it's like dusk into night, we can't find this guy. And one of them, very well-intentioned Good Samaritan vessel, said, "Hey, I think I see some red star shells out, like some red flares out in front of me, off to the side." We're like, "Oh, dang, like cool. Like, where is that?" And so he's trying to talk us onto it. We can't find it. We're making passes. We'll like fly over the top of him, and then like tell us how far to turn, and then we'll level out and keep flying and see if we can find it that way. And we're just not seeing anything on radar. But it's like, well, it's kind of snotty out. Maybe we're not going to see it. Sometimes sailboats don't show up well. And at one point, we came over the top of him and was like, okay, we started to notice that he would oftentimes see those like not too long after he saw us. I was like, all right, we're gonna give it one more effort here. We're gonna come over the top of you, and then I want you to take your searchlight, because he had a searchlight on board. I want you to take your searchlight and just point it in the azimuth, the direction where you see these shells.
Okay.
And so we did that, and that turned out to be a poor choice, because we came over the top of him. Well, we were offset, but basically over the top of him. And after a couple seconds, he's like, "Yeah, I see him," and he just lit us up with his 10 million watt candle power thing, and we just instantly, everyone's just blinded on board. It's like, "Yep, oh gosh, yeah, that's us, pal." Thanks for that. I think you're probably seeing our lights. He's like, "Oh yeah, no, that would make sense." Cool.
Just
So
flashes.
yeah,
Navigation lights on the helicopter. Got it.
Yeah, fooled once again. So, but we did eventually find the boat, and the reason we couldn't find him is because he had lost all power. So he was talking on his handheld, and it had very little range at this point, and it was riding really low in the water. It was like not much freeboard at all, from what we could tell. And but he didn't want to get off the boat. He didn't want to abandon it out there. He was like, "I got the flooding stopped. I'm not really. I think I have a way to dewater it." I was like, "Okay, do you want to pump?" "No." "Sure you don't want to get off the boat?" "Sure." Like, okay, well, we kind of going through that whole spiel about like, hey, it took us a really long time to find you because you have no way to communicate. It's crappy weather, and you're pretty far out here, and like, can't make any guarantee at all if your situation deteriorates that we're A, going to be able to find you again, or B, even going to hear it if you make the call. And, usually those conversations, I think, kind of help someone make up their mind and sway them in the direction of, all right, maybe I should just bail out of the situation. But it didn't in that case. He
Wow.
felt really strongly about he was going to make it to Bermuda and he wasn't going to lose his sailboat. I'm like, okay.
I'm surprised he
So-
didn't take the pump, actually. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
why wouldn't? Yeah, I mean, I'm not on board. It's not my call, but I'm just thinking as a guy who has a flooded boat, I'd want an extra pump on board to get rid of the water.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, we were all like really surprised, kind of dumbfounded, just about how that whole thing played out. It's like, hey, like the race isn't worth it, if that's what you're worried about, or, but yeah, I mean, we sat there hovering next to him as he was transiting for a while, just talking back and forth, and ultimately refused all help. So we came back.
Okay.
But what can you do?
Yeah, exactly. What can you do? For those that don't know, in the U.S. Coast Guard, the HH-60, so the Jayhawk, because of the size of the cabin, we actually carry a small little, most people would know as like a lawnmower engine, but a small 1-horse engine that's a dewatering pump, and that stays with the aircraft all the time. So and I say that because the H-65, the Dolphin, that one you have to actually put the pump on board because they won't carry it. It's okay, we got a dewatering or we got a boat sinking, so grab the pump or two. So the 60 always has it.
Yep. Yeah, unless we take it off,
there.
for a medevac or something, just to free up some space. Because I mean, the box is what was it? Probably like 2 by 2 by 2, something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe 2.5 by 2.5 by 2.5. It's a floating box, so the way that we can do it is either directly deliver it to a boat, or we can, drop it in the water with a line over the boat so they can pull it in and start it up. But it's got, an intake hose, a discharge hose, and then the pump, like you said, as well as a gas can. So it's a great tool. We've used it quite a bit up in Sitka, but for whatever reason, he didn't want to come to a stop and just try and deal with that, or I don't know. He didn't want it, so
right
we didn't give it. Yeah.
All good.
Yeah.
Hey, you did your best. Yeah, you did your best to convey. Hey, here's the worst case scenario. Good luck. We're here for you. Call us back. We'll do what we can.
We'll do what we can. No promises.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Nice, Ryan, man. Thanks for taking us through Elizabeth City. That's amazing. Like, well done. Again, 43 cases, 20 lives saved and/or assisted. So, props. Good job, man. Well, it seems to be that time because we've hit our bingo. We'll be relaunching for part 2 of this episode after we refuel. We'll see you soon. Go. Now, it's time for me to pull chocks and take off. But before I go, I'm always looking for the memorable rescues that people have done. If you have one that you're willing to share or know somebody who has a story, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to highlight it here at The Real Rescue. For everybody that is standing by for that SAR alarm, remember, those in distress are praying for a miracle. They are going to get you. So until next time, fly safe and swim hard. Thank you for joining me today here at the Real Rescue Podcast, powered by Vertical Helicast. We'd also like to say thank you to our sponsors for this episode.
Collins Aerospace Goodrich. Whether your mission is saving lives or servicing high-value assets, Collins Aerospace's Goodrich hoists stay ready to assist. Features such as single-point payout reduce the potential for hoist-induced load swings, enhancing overall safety.
And
Axnis. The Axnis PNG wireless ICS system delivers cutting-edge wireless ICS technology to any aircraft. As a fully integrated system or as a carry-on, carry-off mobile base station, the PNG wireless system is the right solution for any mission.
working on a go wad, but you have a puppy.
What the hell?
You're stretching. Now it's time to play. Just helping you.